Hello, hi Simone, hi Bunya, hi Elga, hi Adam. Good to see you after a while.
Thank you
Hi
so much.
Diana, good to see you after about 2 hours. Um, and hi Joe, good to see you after about 4 hours. Um, so some of you are brand new and one quite new. So I'm just give you a bit of context here. Um, what we're doing is working through all 64 hexagrams. In fact, rewind from that. The book, just assuming you know nothing. The Book of Changes, the I Ching or Yi Jing or um, Zhou Ching, um, is a collection of 64 six line figures, each of which describes a situation of the human condition, if you like. Among other things, each of those 64 hexagrams relates to a particular month. And what we've been doing for 2 years, Bunya, 2 years, something like that, is working through the hexagrams in the order in which they correspond to the months. So this one we're looking at today, which is hexagram 26. Am I right? 26. Um, yeah, it is. Which is mountain over heaven, actually relates to the water dragon. And this is a water dragon month. So we've got, I don't know how many we've done. We must have done about 30. We're probably just about halfway through, I would have thought. And now, the purpose of doing this is to go more deeply into the Book of Changes in three basic ways. Way number one is if you have drawn this hexagram today, these are things that it might be saying to you. And you might say, well, I haven't drawn it. Well, I would suggest that by being here, you probably have. So this is kind of the way that divination works. So this hexagram is telling us about this month, and I will attempt to point out what I think it means generally, and also what I think it means line by line, because you could throw it and get um, particular changing lines. The mechanism by which you would cast a hexagram is you might throw coins. If you don't know how to do that, I've got in writing somewhere instructions for doing that. But what historically people have been doing for more than 3,000 years is one way or another using a method such as throwing coins, such as using what are called yarrow stalks to tell them which line to look at, which hexagram to look at, and which line to look at specifically. Um, so I'm going to do that. First of all, I'll give you some background, but we'll talk about how each line might be of use as well as what the whole hexagram itself is telling us. I was originally interested in doing this because I'm interested in telling the future, if you like. Um, as you know, if you know me at all, you'll know that I'm particularly interested in the way that the stems and branches of Bazi um, work in cycles and can tell us things about what's going on. So if you, for instance, we're observing that we are in 2026 fire horse, which would be equivalent to 1966, previous fire horse, 1906, previous fire horse to that, and 1846. And if we were to go to 1846, because it's so interesting, at that point, America was attempting to expand its borders to the south. Does that sound at all familiar? Um, because what happened with Texas was that it was flooded with American settlers. After which they decided, well, we're Americans, so this must be America, and Mexico was kind of powerless to do much about it. So in 1846, you had the Mexican Wars, so you have a kind of a parallel going there. China, more interestingly, the Chinese guys are very excited about this because about this the fire horse year. In fact, they've got this whole thing about the crimson horse and the blood goat. Who's heard about that? No, we're Chinese melodramatic terminology anyway. Crimson horse, blood goat. But 1966 was the year of the Cultural Revolution, so they've got every reason to be a little bit wary of this. 1906, I think I'm right in saying, was the death of the penultimate emperor and also of the dowager, who was the lady who kept the whole thing together. 1846, in China, every European nation that felt greedy enough was in China raping, pillaging, stealing, and generally making off with stuff. Difference between the USA, you might say. So apologies, Americans here. Yeah, two Americans. Got two Americans here. Well, I think we talked frankly about this, but with you, with me, Diana, and also Simone. Um, the difference is the Chinese are kind of aware of the process and have noted what happened 180 years ago and been very careful to not allow it to happen since. Whereas America is repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. And there's obviously more to it than that. Um, but I came into looking at all of the hexagrams with a view to looking at how they reflected what's going on. And what I find particularly interesting is I've been working particularly the last couple of days looking very closely at this hexagram, and it shows some really interesting stuff. Again, for those of you who are not that familiar with the history, the Book of Changes, the 64 diagrams, if you like, hexagrams, are certainly 3,000 years plus old. If you get a copy of the Book of Changes, actually in the form of a book, like this guy, which most people have got, that's the standard work, Richard Wilhelm. It's a textbook rather than a book for a diviner. Whereas this guy, you can see this has had a bit of use. This one is probably the best if you want to use it as a book of divination. It's the best because it doesn't tell you anything. I mean that it translates the Chinese lines. It doesn't say this is what is meant by it. Whereas Wilhelm is full of those kind of interpretations. And if, like me, what you want to do is to interpret directly from the material, you want this rather than that one. There was a reason that I was saying that. I lost my train of thought. What did I say before that? Where was I? No, you've forgotten too. Okay. Um, my purpose was anyway to talk about the hexagrams. They've been around 3,000. I know what it was. There is text applying to the hexagram per se, and that is certainly 3,000 years old plus. It was written by a guy referred to as King Wen in about 1053 BC. It was just before he was the patriarch of the Zhou dynasty, which ended up ruling China for close to 1,000 years. This was before he rose up and he was imprisoned by the tyrant of Shang, who in the great Chinese tradition was a very, very bad man, who, among other things, is reckoned to have served up King Wen's son in the form of a meat pie, which, that is not a friendly thing to do to your subjects. It entitles you to refer to him as a tyrant, I suppose. But anyway, King Wen was imprisoned for, the accounts differ, a year or 2 years, probably in solitary for about 2 years, and is reckoned to have organized the hexagrams into the order in which they've come down to us. And also to have written the text that applies to each hexagram. There's also text applying to each line. So when you cast coins, it will say it's this hexagram and this changing line or not. And so there are things to read that will tell you answers to your question. I mean, the format is you would decide what your question is, write it down. I would suggest spend a bit of time making sure that is what you meant and getting in touch with algorithms or whatever. Throw the coins or whatever. You'll get a hexagram. You may get changing lines. My point is this: the text about the hexagram, as I've, anyone who's been following this for a while knows this because I've said it so many times. Um, the text of the hexagram comes from King Wen. The text for the lines, much more recent. Well, we will look at both, but what the Book of Changes can do is to give you clear answers to things. And this is not really a spooky thing because all you're doing is talking to yourself. What you're doing is allowing yourself to be reminded of things, if you like, because these things will mean something to you. So that's how it's going to inform you. But what I was interested in was how the monthly hexagrams reflected the day. And I think this particular hexagram is extraordinarily eloquent in that way. Because the thing that fascinates me is that King Wen, even all that time ago, seems to have had the most extraordinary insight into human beings and to the way things worked. And I think this hexagram is a really good example of that. So I'll try to explain it in a way that's kind of understandable, not too obscure. Um, and we'll do it, I think, in the order. We will look first of all at an overview and a line by line. Then we will look, I think, at what I have particularly drawn from that. And then finally, we'll look at the way it may be reflecting things going on in the world right now. And if you want to engage or ask questions or raise points or whatever, I'm really happy to do that while we're talking. But I am recording, and my ambition is to use this recording on YouTube because it saves me recording it again separately just in case I do it well. So be aware that you're going to be in the recording if you ask a question or say something. So let's start with that. So I'm going to start with the material that you have got there. So as to establish some things. Okay, so I have in front of me a piece of paper. You've got two. Hexagram 26, Dachu sees the day. It is mountain over heaven. If you're not familiar with these things, a hexagram, meaning six pictures, consists of two trigrams, three pictures. In fact, three lines. This hexagram, the bottom three are referred to as Qian, heaven. They are yang lines, unbroken lines. And historically, unbroken lines mean yes and forward and speed and light and all sorts of things. They are yang. And yin lines mean no and slower and darker and all sorts of other things. The trigrams have individual meanings relating to points on the compass, members of the family, and a whole load of things additional. So the lower trigram is heaven, yang, yang, yang. The upper trigram is mountain, yin, yin, yang, and I'm reading from the bottom. And there are many things that we can conclude from that shape, some of which I'll refer to. I'm quoting Wilhelm, I was reading this morning. Such a man is in harmony with heaven. Therefore, even great and difficult undertakings, such as crossing the great water, succeed. And the last month's hexagram, I thought Wilhelm totally had the wrong end of the stick, which is a bit outrageous because he's the the most established authority. I think he has here too. I think he really doesn't get it. But you're entitled to disagree, and anyone who watches the recording is too. The purpose of these sessions is one, to offer some ideas as to what the hexagram may mean to anyone who may have cast it today and what the changing lines may mean. And I suggest that you have thrown it by being here. Secondly, to draw attention to the underlying timeless wisdom. I'm going to close the window because it's noisy. There will be things here that are easily missed, that are quite elusive and very subtle. And we perhaps have a tendency to think about evolution of humanity, that people 5, 10, 20,000 years ago must have been less clever than we are. There is very little evidence of that. And there is wisdom here that is kind of spooky in terms of its understanding of human beings. And it's kind of anachronistic. But I'll get to that. And Thirdly, to assess the extent to which the hexagram reflects current events. So, da means great, chu means restraint. It also means reserve, so it may mean cattle, it may mean the feed for the cattle, those things. But I think this word restraint is one to bear in mind because it has a deeper meaning, perhaps, than Wilhelm saw, I think, which, forgive me. Um, it means much more than perhaps comes to the naked eye right away. So, Dachu, sometimes called great restraint, great offering, great accumulation. Also, Peter Fabres has suggested, Peter Fabres, a wonderful acupuncturist, songwriter, and human being, whom I studied the Book of Changes with 25 years ago. Great domestication, he liked. Great domestication. And I can consult his translations and my notes from 25 years ago in constructing these things. But more usually the taming power of the great. And I think this taming power of the great, we might hear it a particular way, but we might think, oh, no, they can't possibly mean that. But they do, and I will get to it. Anyway, places Gen, mountain, Yang, earth, the youngest sun, that trigram on top. Again, it's the mountain, looks like a mountain, but Yang on top of two yins. The youngest son over Qian, heaven, the father. This, in terms of hierarchy, is an unusual position because it puts the youngest son in charge, if you like. And just as hexagram 34 speaks of the rare event of thunder positioned over heaven, hexagram 34, Dazhuang, great strength. So this speaks of power that needs considered release. This word restraint. What do we mean by restraint? Holding someone back, being contained, being kind of in possession of our faculties, not overdoing it. So power that needs considered release. It is a time that is appropriate that is to be seized. What do I mean by that? It's a time that is appropriate that is to be seized. So I call it seize the day. I have called it seize the day for a long time. I'm not even sure whether I made that up. I don't think I did, because it is Dachu, whereas number 9 is Xiaochu, which is lesser opportunities. And the fact that the youngest son is, if you like, in control of heaven, the Father, the Almighty, it's not a thing that happens a lot, I think. So that's why seize the time. But there's more to it. So if we're on to page 2, you have the diagram here, hexagram 26, Dachu seize the day. I've got a quotation here from George Melly, which may make more sense later on. Anyone know who George Melly was? Well, yes, Elgida's got a jazz singer.
I'm old, Richard.
Yes, yes. A jazz singer, but very entertaining jazz singer, very funny, literary critic, general kind of polymath. He was saying that when sex no longer mattered to him, it was like being unchained from a lunatic. That's the context of this. The structure of the hexagram. Mountain is the youngest son over heaven, the father. And you would know, Cheryl, this may not be obvious to you. Mountain is the youngest son. If you look at the top trigram here, 2 reasons. One is the yang trigrams are more yin than yang. And in the way of Chinese metaphysics, that's kind of how it works. And the top line is indicates which sun it is, and you read from the bottom. So it's the 3rd sun because it's yang at the top and the other 2 are yin. And each hexagram you can decode kind of like that. So over time, if you get interested in this, you'll know how to do it. The balance, 2 yin lines, 4 yang lines. So we've got 2 yin lines kind of trapped near the top there. What some of you know and some of you don't is the ruler, the governor, the line in charge is usually the 5th. And the reason it is the 5th is because only the 5th can be central in the middle of a trigram. It's the middle of a top trigram. Also what's called correct, because a yang line should be in the odd numbered positions, and also firm, meaning it's kind of sticking with it. But we have two yin lines there, so this is quite uncertain in that respect. There is connection technically between 1 and 4 and 2 and 5, meaning that the yin line at the bottom has a formal relationship with the yin line at the fourth, and the yin line at the second has a formal relation with the fifth. Sometimes it means it gives them support. Sometimes the lower lines refer to the general public, if you like, the people, and the higher lines refer to the bosses, if you like. And there's a connection here between the lower lines and the upper lines, which suggests some support, some inspiration. This is a hexagram that implies connection being required, connection of a particular type being required. The host rule is the fourth, not firm, not central, but it is correct because it should be at the fourth line. The fifth is central, it's not firm, but it is correct. So neither of those are 100% the rulers. So therefore, commentators over the years have decided that there are possibly two different ruling lines because none of them is perfect. Your ruling line will be the best line or the most typical line, and neither of those is quite that. The ideograph is a human being over a grain store or a field. If you had Alfred Huang's book of changes, this guy, which is the best one you can get hold of easily, in my opinion. Wu Jing Yuan that I showed you earlier is quite hard to get hold of and will cost you 70 or 80 quid second hand, which is extraordinary. We actually looked today. I was thinking of buying one for a friend, and I thought, gosh, that's an awful lot of money. Yeah, there you have. There's a bloke there, and he's looking over a field, or possibly a reservation, reserves, cattle, perhaps, some kind of property, a grain store or a field. This hexagram technically relates to the 8th month. So if you threw this and you were saying, when's this going to happen? If you were to say, when am I going to get a new job or something, and you threw this, it would be telling you that it was the 8th month, but it can be more subtle than that. The nuclear, which is the hexagram that gives rise to this using certain rules I'm not going to waste time going over now, is number 41. So it suggests that this hexagram grows out of a situation called decrease, which is, as you might expect, paired with one called increase. And decrease is about making rather silly mistakes. But I mean, particularly mistakes in business, mistakes in administration that are based on poor motives for being in power. The abuse of power is what number 41 often means. So a few notes here that I made. When a yang trigram is on top, the thrust of the hexagram tends to be towards control. You could look at those hexagrams 41, 54, 13 to see what I mean. While an upper yin gua suggests creative cooperation. So it is a different thing when there's a yang hexagram, trigram on top. It tends to be a kind of I'm in charge here. Whereas when there's a yin one on top of a yang, it tends to be a restoring of balance and cooperation. So hexagram number 42, increase, which I sometimes call the best man for the job is a woman, is wind over thunder. And it's not about wind dominating thunder. It's about them reversing positions, and perhaps the yin we may personify as being a woman, but the yin being the brains, and the thunder being the kind of enforcer. But as I say, my observation is yin on top is about cooperation, and yang on top is kind of forcible. Also, in the order in which King Wen has pasted them, the hexagram Da Chu, which I've first typo, letter wrong there, it's CHU usually, is preceded by the heavenly blessing Wu Wang. So in the order in which the hexagrams have been set out, Wu Wang, no error. Number 25, the blessing of heaven to the eldest son, precedes Da Chu, which is the youngest son being briefly in charge. You might draw from that that there is some kind of competition between sons for the father's attention. And again, I think this makes sense in some other things we might look at here. Um, yeah, so Wu Wang implies authorization from above. And I often relate it to the thing in whichever gospel it is. I think it's John. Diana, you probably know better than me. Which is the one where the cloud opens and God says to John the Baptist, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." Where's that, John? I think it's John because John's different, isn't it? But anyway, that image to me always reminds me of that. So as if the relative blessing to the third son is like an afterthought. This is a visionary moment, a mountain seen through cloud, or a glimpse of heaven at its summit. But much learning and development is called for. First, this is, among other things, a hexagram of informed purpose. It's a hexagram of training, if you like. It's a hexagram of taming and training, the taming power of the great. And I suggest that it is the taming power of the yin over the yang, the taming power of the gentle over the aggressive, the taming power of the thoughtful over the impulsive. Both ruling lines, the fourth and the fifth, are flawed, neither possessing all three qualities of firmness, correctness, and centrality. I pretty much said that. Both are dependent upon their neighbors, the fifth upon powers beyond, and the fourth on advice from beneath. So, just to summarize, here is the text for the whole thing on page 3. Dachu sees the day. Quotation from Peter Firebrace: "Mountain contains and restrains heaven's power. The restraining is about power not being abused, about power being focused." And the text says, "Profit the divination, lichen," which always means that. "Do not eat at home," which is suggesting you need to be entertained. You should be being out in the world. Ju means good fortune. Li Shi Dachuan, advantageous to cross the great stream. I mean, excuse my execrable Chinese. I am no speaker of Chinese. What it's saying is a goal is needed. It's time to celebrate in good company and make some decisions, but first let's get the house in order. And there is a summary of broadly what I think the lines mean. So if you literally just wanted the advice this hexagram is giving you, is saying, firstly, best delay if all moves involve danger. 2, stuff happens, get used to it. 3, process and end both need to be served. So being in a hurry or demanding a result quickly is no way to get things done. Posturing becomes contained force. Temptation is removed. And line 6 leads to peace if we get it right. So that's the structure. Let us look at the line texts. I quoted here Tom Gunn. I've quoted Tom Gunn before. Does anyone know Tom Gunn's poetry? Tom Gunn was possibly one of the least known of the great 20th century poets. Tom spelled Thom. Best known poem is probably what's called the Sense of Movement. He's kind of a gay icon. He was very gay, a bit of a biker, spent most of his life in California, died about 3 or 4 years ago. I studied him when I was an adolescent. I thought he was absolutely wonderful. And this quotation: "I stamp upon the earth a message to my mother, and then I lower my horns." And we will learn more about horns as we go along, and be aware of the symbolism of horns. It's really, they do mean what you might make of them. I mean, whatever you make of them will be correct. That's divination. But it is not kind of coincidence these words are being used both in Tom Gunn's poetry and in King Wen's analysis, and also in the later interpretations for that matter. So 9 at the first, there is danger, best stop. It's yang, it's firm, it's not central, but it's correct. So if you've thrown at this is not the moment to force a conclusion with the constraint of the 2 yang lines immediately above. Restlessness is no reason for action. Obstruction may be saving you from error. And if we were to change that line, we would get mountain over wind, which is Gu, hexagram 18, poison. The image is of a jar into which are put a series of poisonous insects who keep fighting until they're all dead and are then liquidized and drunk. I mean, I think the idea is it heals something, but it sounds pretty unpleasant to me. But that's what hexagram 18 is. But what it means is dealing with your stuff. Now, when I say stuff is like a technical term in NLP circles, it means your emotional damage, if you like, your family pattern damage, the stuff that you grow up with that you'd be better off not having. In fact, who knows what the Dolby system is? No, no one, no musicians here. Dan, do you know what the Dolby system is? You do. Right, okay. Um, it is. I'll tell them anyway. It is a system whereby cassette tapes, while they were a thing, well, they've been coming back recently, were the hiss on cassette tapes was removed. And it was a really clever idea because what it consisted of was boosting the treble at the recording process and then taking the treble back drastically in the reproduction process. So you lost unnecessary treble at the top end and the hiss at the same time. Yeah, it was kind of brilliant in its day. I don't think these days it has much application. But the point is that for human beings, we are learning all the time. We learn apparently, fastest when we're younger, and apparently we make tens of thousands, no, I think 10,000 decisions a day is what I've read somewhere, as if someone was counting. But the point I'm making here is we learn stuff equal amounts of total nonsense and useful stuff. And it would be really useful if we had a Dolby system that got rid of the nonsense at age 18, so we only hung on to the stuff that was worth knowing. But human beings are not built like that. But poison is dealing with your stuff, dealing with your emotional issues, dealing with your pain, dealing with your stuckness. No. So poor timing can turn a moment of consideration into tragedy. A time not to be motivated by discomfort this time, when you've thrown this line, this hexagram, this line, a time not to be motivated by discomfort, which may be ancient and inherited and needs feeling through. Inaction is superior to wrong action. So no action is superior to wrong action. Not for forcing the issue, however desperate you are to move, save your strength. And Elga, the analogy I was drawing about Syria, was of male members of parliament in 2014 deciding what we needed to do was to bomb Syria because they didn't understand any other language, but broadly because a lot of testosterone driven energy wanted to be effective and important and could only see death and destruction as the only way of expressing it. Does that sound familiar? So not limited to the United States. We may argue that it may be a more male thing than a female thing, but we'll get to that. So the trap here is wanting to move rather than be still, even though you have business to deal with, your own processing or whatever, before you move. And as I've said many times, a decision made to stop you feeling something painful is probably the wrong decision. That's not blanket. It's probably not true if you've got your hand in a mincer, but it's emotional pain. Feeling it is the way through. Any action, including bombing unarmed civilians, is probably not a better way of dealing with it. So second line, the carriage is impeded, the axles come away. Now this is saying shit happens, is what this says. It's yang, it's firm, it's central, it's not correct. So it's not going anywhere, but it's not right. It's something not quite right about it. It is restrained or perhaps warned by the fifth line. Do you remember this is in contact with the fifth line? The fifth line maybe is someone who has a better view, is higher up the hierarchy, knows what's really going on, knows what the strategy is around things. Stuff happens, not helpful to seek perpetrators, not helpful to blame. The single most irresponsible and useless thing we can do is to blame. If we blame, we are no longer in charge of our own lives. So this is your story, your responsibility. Lean into it is what it is advising. Sounds like I'm advising. I'm not. I mean, I kind of endorse it, but this is King Wen 3,000 years ago advising you. Lean into the fact that it's happened. Nothing to be done about it. Um, and the change, the hexagram you get by changing the second line is to mountain over fire, which is B, hexagram number 22, adorn. And the meaning is something like making the best of apparent misfortune, which may long term prove not to be misfortune at all. Conscious restraint is extraordinarily powerful. Hence, fasting and celibacy and all sorts of things. I'm not, again, not recommending these things, but conscious restraint is a very powerful thing. I don't think we'll go into withdrawals into the desert in the 4th century AD. I think that's hopelessly arcane, but relevant to those interested in such things, Diana. So following with good horses, next line 9, the third, take advantage of obstacles. Divine, chun means divine. Profit the divination is a normal translation. Train every day in the martial arts, but best to have a reason to practice. So this is yang, firm, correct, not central. So again, it has this yang feel, if you like, this male feel to it. It is firm. It is correct because it is in the third line. Odd lines are yang, but it is not central, so it's not balanced. The middle path, which is the metaphor, is the middle line, is one of moderation, of good measure, of everything in moderation. Anyway, now there is somewhere to go. You're supported by the power of heaven at the 6th line. Horses must gallop, but a journey requires an appropriate destination. Avoid the aimless or acting just because you can. So it's a slight development over line 2. But don't act just because you can. Don't gallop just because you can gallop. Gallop to somewhere to do something. Trust your resources and your support system. So that's the advice that I see in there. The third change is to mountain over lake, which is Son, hexagram 41, decrease, which speaks of being motivated in all sorts of wrong ways. And the advice is to know your motivations and impulses. Don't, as they say, believe everything you think. So if you are dealing with a puzzle at this moment, the answer may be to have a good look at what your motivations are. And, our motivations sometimes elude us. We sometimes, pursue things without much idea of why the hell we're doing it. Now, this is where it starts getting interesting. A wooden yoke for the bullock's horns. Firm good fortune. So the idea is that things are put on the bullock's horns so it can't hurt anybody. And the bullock is a very strong yang metaphor. A bull is yang. A bullock is yin and yang. And bullocks have implications of parenthood, of being a stud, of sexual prowess, that kind of stuff. These are international metaphors for that stuff, I think. The advice is to think ahead, protect yourself and others from rash behavior. So if the rash behavior might come from uncontrolled male impulses, what you need to do is to blunt the horns of the bullock, clearly male. Prevention is so much more powerful than winning through violence. So as the Book of Changes says, the only inevitable outcome of violence is further violence. So every time I see some child in Gaza being in quotation marks martyred, I see a recruit for Hamas. I mean, isn't that obvious? So winning through violence is no winning at all. Action must be appropriate, not simply for its own sake. The only inevitable outcome of violence is further violence. That's somewhere in the Book of Changes. I can't remember where. The fourth change is to fire over heaven, Dayu, great possession. Hexagram 14, if you like, is everything going swimmingly. The images of the sun in the sky and everybody being in the sun and having picnics, and it's all kind of working. But the way that the hexagrams have been ordered by King Wen is hexagram 13, Tongren, Union of Men, precedes hexagram 14, Great Possession, implying that you need to go through hexagram 13, Tongren, Union of Men, to get to Great Possession. What is Tongren, Union of Men? It is heaven on fire. The implication is of major disruption in order to get to that place, which is not, I think, advice, it's a warning. It's saying, be aware you can have plenty without struggle. Be aware that it is not necessary to manipulate or to have more than your fair share. That, to be open and fair probably works best. I mean, and perhaps that's naive, but you know what? I would sooner be naive. I am happy to be naive. And you don't have to agree, of course. And now we get even more pointed. The tusks of a castrated bull. Good fortune. And, horns are clearly phallic symbols as well as being a sign of the virility of the bull. Restore gentleness by restraining masculinity. Restore gentleness by restraining masculinity. And we're talking here about, there are implications here of Me Too, of toxic masculinity, of abuse of leadership power. This is the 5th line. And King Wen was seeing this stuff. He was seeing Me Too 3,000 years ago. I mean, yeah, I think I'll stick with that. The most powerful line is how to contain the yang, a voice silenced to temptation removed. And it is an indictment of the male. Well, I'm happy saying male rather than yang. And the 5th change is to wind over heaven, Shao Chu, hexagram 9, lesser opportunity. It actually is the counterpart, hexagram 9, to hexagram 26. Hexagram 26 sees the day, great opportunity. Hexagram 9 is lesser opportunity, Shao Chu. It's saying that the danger has been reduced. Moderation has been imposed. And the top line, what is the highway of heaven? And be firm. Yang, not central, incorrect. It's a little bit flaky, this line, because it is yang and therefore there to inform and provide kind of guard, if you like, for the 2 yin lines below. Yeah, above it all now, but informing the ruler at the 5th. And the top line is about ideology. It's about God. It's about heaven. It's about being out of society. So there's someone here as kind of a wise person who may be a reference point. All of those things meant by the 6th line. But the advice is something like putting your reserves to good use. It is time to distribute and share. And the 6th and final change is to earth over heaven, which is Tai, hexagram 11, which is peace. It is earth over heaven, and it is peace because heaven is doing that and earth is doing that. So they're joining. Whereas hexagram number 12, peace, stagnation, is the other way around, separating. Earth goes down, heaven goes up, they join. Earth goes down, heaven goes up, they separate. Yeah. Everything that's right place as heaven ascends to meet earth descending. Now, I think we will go to the last bit of this document last. I think I will go to my kind of summary. Some of this is a little bit pushing the boat out. Some of it you might disagree with. And you might not. So such a man, Wilhelm, such a man is in harmony with heaven, therefore even great and difficult undertakings such as cross the great water succeed. I think I quoted that already, didn't I? So often King Wen, working alone in his cell at the behest of the tyrant of Shang, appears to demonstrate a preternaturally deep understanding of human beings and the human condition. It's sometimes extraordinary to consider that he was given the hexagrams, titles, and Gua text more than 3,000 years ago. As you know, the year itself predates the ordering and naming of the hexagrams by centuries at least. I suspect longer than that. I think the line text so often have a Confucian feel to them, which means that they're best part of 1,000 years later. No, that's right, 500 to 600 years later. Its employment as a divinatory device is at least 4,000 years old. And at a time when human beings did not have much idea of the way the world worked, or of what preceded or caused what, it offered a glimpse into the order of things that was pre-scientific. Veridical decisions could be made without calculation at a time when there was no data to work with. Would the sun return in the new year? Could certain seeds give birth to another generation of edible plants, and so on? Nobody knew. So the diviner was asked, are we going to find food in that direction? Where's the water? What's the weather going to be like? Things that, even now we have problems knowing, and they had no science as such at that point. At its earliest, the Book of Changes didn't consist of text at all, but simply of 64 diagrams, each of which describes an aspect, often a conundrum, of the human condition. Given the possibility of changing any combination of lines in order to create a further nuanced hexagram, the number of situations covered was close to infinite. So I'm saying we have 64 hexagrams, 6 changing lines for each. In any combination, you could change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or none. There are a lot of situations there. Nonetheless, King Wen's implicit perceptions are sometimes anachronistic to the point of prescience. And I noticed that prescience is pre-science, which is pre-science. Well, there you go. I've always thought of this month's Dagua Chu, Dachu, as seize the day, its structure being a kind of obverse to both hexagram 33, Dun, the yielding, where heaven dominates mountain, and hexagram 34, Da Zhuang, great strength, in which the eldest son appears unusually to have power over heaven the Father. So it seems like those. If you were interested in doing so, you might go back and have a look at hexagram 33 and look at hexagram 34, where their shape is reminiscent of the shape of this. So Dajuan, great strength, in which the eldest son appears unusually to have power over heaven the Father, if you will, the Almighty. It seems that when a young yang trigram is uppermost, it is in some sense in control. There is a feeling of enforcement about it. And this to me does not seem to be true of hexagrams with an upper yin trigram. Hexagram 42, Yi increase, wind over thunder, the best man for the job is a woman, appears to be about cooperation and the restoration of balance. It follows Sun, that is decrease, which may indicate that having Chun in charge has been tried, so perhaps the alternative should follow. Surely leadership is not an inherently yang thing, which got me thinking about 2026, a year of considerable macho posturing. We have the US Secretary of Idiocy, or whatever it is, saying that, the Iranians were begging them for a settlement, which tells them they're going to pay reparations. Give me a break. Is it possible that King Wen saw in the hexagrams the danger and meaning of such actions? Is that possible 3,000 years ago? I suggest that it is. The mention of phallic symbols and the emasculation of a fundamentally yang symbol like a bullock raises questions as to what the deeper meanings of Da Chu might be. Firstly, if we follow my perhaps subjective observation of how a yang upper trigram makes for some sort of enforcement and apply it to Da Chu, we have the condition of again the youngest son having the drop on Qian the father. This seems perhaps less likely and certainly less Confucian than Chun, the eldest son, dominating. So it's an unusual situation. It does seem to be about youth. It is the youngest son, and to indicate a very brief and unsettled state of affairs. Are we dealing with a warning about the impetuosity of youth in general, and young men in particular? Are we dealing with inherent violence? The inherent violence of men, and are we dealing with the relationship between inherent violence and sex? The first line counsels, I said I'm pushing the boat out a bit. The first line counsels not jumping to conclusions. Await the appropriate time, don't force it. And that initial change to number 18, Gu, poison, wind over mountain, may imply that few dramas are ever what they appear to be about, an examination of our own stuff, that is the damage imposed by DNA family patterns, but most particularly by choice. Getting it's by choice is how you bypass blame, conscious or otherwise, may be the most useful response to whatever puzzle is presented. So I'm saying examination of our own damage imposed by DNA and family patterns, but most particularly by choice, conscious or otherwise, may be the most useful response to whatever puzzle is presented. The detusked bullock at the fourth line and the castrated one in the fifth line are telling us something about how we either preempt or eliminate a particular kind of energy. And I'm going to go no further with that because that I hope is food for thought. I would recommend you to a movie called Personal Services from the 1990s, which is about a brothel madam called Cynthia Payne, who is a very funny woman. It's an entertaining movie, who is amusingly making the kind of point that I have a feeling that King Wen was making. He was saying you need to control young men, that most problems come from groups of young men undersupervised. We might even take young out of that. And I'm speculating that what is going on in the world at the moment is exactly that problem. I mean, watching Pete Hegseth on his bloody rowing machine is very, very clear to me that this applies pretty much to him. And perhaps then learning that rather than thinking they're somehow being clever by killing thousands of people would be a good idea. So that is all that I have to say. Would anyone like to comment, ask questions, contest what I'm saying? Over to you guys. Elga.
Well, yeah, I found this one, 26, enormously difficult, really difficult. So I'm really trying to be sort of putting it forward respectfully, if you like. But basically, I found myself more and more drawn to the idea not of the younger son, the mountain as the younger son, but the mountain on top as the future. Okay, and that future with that tunnel through it. So the idea of an awful lot of difficulties getting there, and the father, if you like, the father with the duty to form the future, to train the future. I got very much caught into that idea. So, and on that basis, then the next thing that really stopped me in my passage was the dates that were applying, okay, and within the months. And it was this idea of training, and it could be a father and a son, but it could be someone with a bit more experience and wisdom and somebody with less experience and wisdom. So I found myself very hooked into the idea of the visit the king is to make, which happens on where we're at line 5. Between that visit is on the 27th to the 30th of April.
Yep.
Okay. And I just found myself sort of dreaming away on it. What on earth can they, first of all, why does this poor man with his cancer, have to make this trip at all? Why is the government asking him to do this? What on earth could possibly be achieved? And then that took me in turn to look at line 5 again, and I ended up with a book I have, a man called Stephen Karcher. Yep. And Stephen Karcher goes in great detail. He makes a quote from the Book of Rights, okay, about the castration and the 5 sacrifices. So, in the 5 sacrifices, you've got the feudal prince, and you've got the officer, and you've got the ox, and a couple of other things I can't recall just at the moment. And I thought, well, I could see some self-interest on Trump, to Charles. Now, how about you send me your brother? Just send him over here for trial. We'd love to have him. And that could divert him for another couple of years. Take him, it could keep them all very busy with persecuting old Andrew. But then I thought, don't stick to what is here, But I did find myself sort of dreaming away on that one. I think that is a most important visit for UK, which has endured this, our civilizational erasure, which again marries into what you were saying there of civilizations coming and going, and then this hopelessly infantile behavior on behalf of this very young polity, the United States. And I thought, well, there is maybe something to be said there. I also got caught, I will stop 1 minute. On the 4th line, where the yin is correct. The yin is correct. Something else I've often wondered, because Trump's mother came from Stornoway, and I find this endlessly fascinating of what she did with a wee free upbringing in Stornoway is not like any other upbringing in the world. It's just not.
Well, so the Scots have a case to answer then.
Well, and her influence on him, and again coming back to this metaphorical castration of all this testosterone and nonsense, the bully boy stuff, that there is a chance that Charles might undermine that and make the situation a little better for Britain. But that was the way I got carried away with it, because I did find it very, very difficult, particularly with contrast with 25. But sorry, I've talked a lot.
No, you're doing great. So gentleness and weakness are quite easily mistaken for each other, aren't they?
Mm. Yeah.
So it is kind of dangerous to be gentle in certain types of company. And so you have to be 100% gentle. You can't be gentle in case you were slightly provoked. And what we have here is a whole mindset, which is of getting revenge in first. I mean, literally what's been happening here in Iran, one of the rationales is they thought they were responding to the possibility that Iran might be responding to them, which is illogical and untrue. But I think this hexagram. I mean, I've laid out the lines here in the material that you've got. I think it is asking all sorts of useful questions. I mean, line 3, I talk about the gutter and the stars, by which I mean that quotation I keep referring to of Oscar Wilde's, which is, we're all of us in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. And we have to get a balance between the stars and the gutter. We may need to be aware of the gutter, but we need to keep looking at the stars. And, we to be cynical is to withdraw and to close up. And the line between cynicism and realism is a pretty fine one, I think. but I'll be interested to see how this month develops, because it does seem to me to be about how um, the how the great is tamed. I mean, how this inherent stupidity in human beings, particularly in men, and I'm not claiming that it's not in me. I mean, I'm a little bit house trained, but how we deal with that, because all of this stuff is a distraction from climate change, and unless we learn to cooperate, we're going to be um, extinct, regardless of who wins the wars. So,
But it's just so fascinating how, again, to go back to this, something to think that this can possibly end with the damage being done to us if it takes $1 million to pass each ship through the strait. And basically, what that will do to the European economy. That doesn't affect the American economy at all. Their oil doesn't come through there, but it will affect us. So that cannot possibly be the end of it, unless really and truly Trump wants to make an enemy of of Europe, or to actually say, I'm actively going to ensure the civilizational erasure of Europe by these actions, because it's been pretty nasty so far.
well, this hexagram is about that
Yeah.
pointless, self-defeating machismo. I think that's exactly what it's about. That's why I found it particularly interesting that it's up right now, because it is suggesting that at the heart of everything that is going wrong with human beings is to do with this rampant yang energy. I hesitate to say male, but it's rampant yang energy. It's energy that expresses itself as violence. In fact, that doesn't express itself, but turns into violence. And this hexagram seems to be really clearly saying that about now and today and what's going on. So, anybody else? Anything you want to add or subtract? No. Okie dokie. Well, um, good to see you all. I will see you all probably sooner than a month, but hopefully I will see you all in a month in addition. Thanks for listening to my 5 bobs worth. I'll see you on YouTube.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everybody.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.